Welcome to another video podcast. In this podcast, we want to look at the effects of multiplying with positive and negative numbers. So let's look at a couple concepts right now. The first thing we need to discuss is what symbol to use to signify multiplication. One of the symbols you're very familiar with is the x, like in 3 times x. This works good as long as we're dealing with numbers, but when we go to algebra, we often use variables. So a multiplication problem might look like this. What does that mean? 3 times x, or 3xx, or 2x's and 3x's are 5x's. You see, we can't use an x any longer for multiplication in algebra. Another symbol you're used to is the dot. So we might have this. Does that mean 3 times 5, or 3.5, 3 5/10? You see, if you don't accurately place the dot, it becomes a problem, and we're not sure if this is a multiplication problem. To deal with these problems in algebra, we'll simply put the two things we're multiplying next to each other. Now, with numbers, that becomes a problem. Is that 35, or is it 3 times 5? When we're dealing with numbers, we'll put parentheses around one to separate it from the other. So this means 3 times 5. This works out very well when we use variables, because if we write 3 next to an x, it means 3x, or 3 times whatever the value of x is. So from now on in multiplication, in algebra, we'll be using just placing the numbers or letters side by side to symbolize multiplication. We'll no longer use the x or the dot to symbolize multiplication. This may take a little getting used to. Now let's talk about the meaning of multiplication and how multiplication is affected by integers. Let's talk about a simple problem like 3 times 4. What does it really mean? Well, these are really positive numbers. We don't usually put the sign in there because we're too lazy to write it, but we assume they're positive numbers. Now, this says take 3 groups of positive 4, or take 4 and add it 3 times. 4 plus 4 plus 4 is 12. So 3 times 4 is 12, or 4 added 3 times is 12. So what does 3 times negative 4 mean? Well, it says take negative 4 and add it 3 times. So negative 4 plus negative 4 plus negative 4 is negative 12. Another possibility is to have a negative 3 times a 4. That means take 4, and instead of adding it 3 times, it means subtract it 3 times. So take away 4, take away 4, take away 4, which is the same as taking away 12, or a negative 12. So negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. The last possibility is to have a negative 3 times a negative 4. Well, what does this mean? It says take a negative 4 and take it away 3 times. So take away a negative 4, and take away a negative 4, and take away a negative 4, which really means take away a negative 12. Now, taking away something bad really is good. So the equivalent of taking away negative 12 is adding 12. So negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. Now, if you take a look at this, you can see there are some equivalents. Adding 3 groups of something good is adding a lot of something good. But taking away 3 groups of something bad has the same effect. You take away bad, that really leaves you good. But if you add a bad thing, it makes it bad, and we get a negative. And if we take a good thing and take it away, it's a bad thing too. So now you can see the meanings of multiplying with integers. Multiplying 2 positives is a good thing. Multiplying 2 negatives is a good thing because you're taking away multiple bad things, which is good. But adding bad things or taking away good things are both bad. So this is what multiplications with integers really means. Now let's look at some problems where we're missing information. Let's take a simple one to start with. like 4x equals 20. This means I take some number and add it 4 times, and I end up with 20. Now, if I add something and end up with something positive or good, I must be adding good things together. So I know my answer is going to be positive. Now, 4 times what is 20? 4 times 5 is 20. That we know because we know our math facts. But now, another way to think about it is more algebraic. I know I want to get rid of this 4, so I'm going to divide by 4. So if I divide this side by 4, I have to be fair and divide the other side of the equation by 4. 20 divided by 4 is 5, and 4 divided by 4 is 1, or 1x. So x equals 5. One way or the other, we can get the solution by using the inverse operation. Notice we took 4 times x. To undo that, we're going to use the inverse operation and divide by 4. Now, let's try a little bit harder problem. For this problem, we'll write 3x equals negative 15. Now, let's just think. We add something 3 times, and we get negative 15. I must be adding bad things or negative things. So I know my answer is going to be a negative. So now let's think. 3 times what is 15? Well, obviously 5. So my answer is x equals negative 5. Or if I take negative 5 and add it 3 times, negative 5 plus negative 5 plus negative 5, I get negative 15. Again, we could use algebra. I have 3 times x, so I want to divide this side by 3. Now, to be fair, I need to divide both sides by 3. Here, if you notice in fractions, I have a big 1. 3 divided by 3 is 1, so I have 1x. And over here, I, of course, have negative 5. So x equals negative 5. Again, either way will get you to the solution. Let's try one last problem. What if we do x times negative 5 equals 35? Now, this may look a little funny. I had to put parentheses around it this time to separate the 5 from the x so you wouldn't think this was x minus 5. Now, we can get around that by simply flipping these two, the negative 5 and the x. We can flip those in multiplication because order doesn't matter in multiplication. It's called the commutative property. 3 times 2 is the same as 2 times 3. X times negative 5 is the same as negative 5 times x. So negative 5x equals 35. Now, let's stop and think. I take away something 5 times and get something good. What do I need to take away to get something good? I need to take bad or negative things away. So I know my answer is negative. Then I simply do the numbers. 35 divided by 5 is 7. So x equals negative 7. The other way to do this is to think negative 5 times x. I only want to know what x is, so I have to undo the multiplying by negative 5. So I'm going to divide by negative 5. I have to do it to both sides. There becomes the big 1, so I have 1x. And over on this side, I have 35 divided by 5 is 7, and I have a negative. Either way will get you the answer. So as you work your problems, remember the things we've learned about multiplication. First, that we now put numbers next to each other to show they are multiplication. That we can switch numbers around in multiplication, called the commutative property. And then when we have to get a positive answer, we have to add positives, or a positive times a positive, or take away negatives, which means a negative times a negative. If we add negatives or take away positives, those are both bad things, and we end up with a negative answer. Good luck as you work your multiplication problems.